Good afternoon. During the previous session, we talked about the Belarusian freedom fights, when Belarusian regime increased and imposed the migration crisis on Lithuania. This is the topic that we are going to talk today. So we will raise the question whether we have found the balance of providing asylum and ensuring human rights, whether the return policy adopted by the border officers are in line with international commitments, and could we do any better, and what our further steps could be. The discussion is presented by the Human Rights Coalition, funded by the European Economic Area Mechanism. I'll talk a little bit about the debate itself. At the very beginning, we'd like to raise a question, and if you answer the question correctly, you will receive a prize. Everyone who wants to give a question to the panelists or comments have to join the website. What is the UN Nations Agency? It takes care of the asylum seekers and providing humanitarian assistance to them. And I will start the very debate with a human dimension. And further on, we'll move on to the national level and to even further to international level. It will all depend on the discussion itself, and maybe we will receive some questions from the audience. I'll briefly introduce the participants. The first one is Mr. Laurynas Biekša, Associate Professor of the International and EU Law Institute of the Mykolas Romeris University, Eglė Samuchovaitė, Head of the Asylum and Migration Program at the Red Cross, Yusuf Muhammadzoda, Head of the Lithuanian Refugee Council, Justina Jakštaitė, Vice Minister of Social Affairs and Labor, and Vitalis Dmitrievas, Vice Minister of the Interior. I will give everyone the floor for the introductory word, so maybe we will start with Yusuf.
My name is Yusuf Muhammadzoda. I am a refugee myself. 3 years I already live in Lithuania, and I am at the same time head director of the Refugee Council of Lithuania.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank for the debate that is organized today and for the topics that have been raised. I will briefly say about the role of the Minister of Social Affairs and Labor. Well, in fact, the mission of the ministry and other ministries is to providing conditions for asylum and integration policy for the vulnerable people. Today, in our refugee center, which are in Rukla and Vilnius, a very new one. So all those institutions have to provide accommodation to over 1,000 vulnerable people, that is families with children, pregnant women, people with disabilities, people who are sick. So we are trying to provide certain methodologies as to how to assess how vulnerable these people are. But I believe that with the international assistance, we will be able to evaluate the vulnerability at the international level. We will also try to improve the accommodation conditions for those people. We will move them either in Medininkai, where they will be provided with warm accommodation. To speak broadly, when it comes to education of children, we have also initiated various mobile teams that tour around those accommodation centers. These teams include social workers and provide all the necessary assistance. we try to ensure that all the people are employed, that they have something to do, and this is very important. We also try to ensure psychological counseling for the people. I would like to mention yet another important aspect, that is the support by the non-governmental organizations in this extreme situation, in this emergency situation. We have been working very actively with the Red Cross Lithuania, Caritas, Malta Order, and so on. These organizations are our partners, our priority partners. We have done a lot of work. We have responded swiftly to the situation. We have adopted very swift decisions because we were loaded and flooded with migrants in summer, and this required quick decisions. We needed to accommodate people. We needed to provide food for those people, and so on and so forth. When it comes to integration, people receive some receive asylum status. We start the integration process. When it comes to integration process, we work together with the Red Cross Lithuania and other non-governmental organizations. So we do see the attitudes of our society, because Lithuanian people are not willing to rent their flats for migrants. It seems that we all have to bring our effort together to help the migrants. When it comes to businesses, businesses are waiting for migrants. They are trying to offer jobs to them, very diverse jobs. They can offer even not only a job, but also accommodation. So I don't want to take much of your time, but I believe that during the discussion, we will be able to address pertinent questions. Thank you. Good afternoon. I am Vitaly Dmitriev. I am the Vice Minister of the Interior, as I have been introduced. From the very first days of the migration crisis, the ministry was the first institution to face those migrants. When it comes to figures, you might be interested that in May, we had 77 persons who crossed the border illegally. In June, this figure rose to almost 500 people. In July, the figure was over 3,000 people. Those were people who crossed the border illegally because they crossed the border not in the places designated for that purpose. So the problem was increasing day by day, and the government had to adopt the decisions with regard to the introduction of the emergency situation. We had very long meetings. We had many meetings. We have had many debates what measures should be taken. We are still continuing the discussion. Now we are trying to debate the situation not only from the perspective of the border officials, but also from the national perspective. This debate is very necessary and timely indeed, because it's high time for us to discuss what accommodation, what reception services we should provide to migrants. I should say that Lithuania had 2 reception centers, one registration center which hosted approximately 200 people, and the refugee reception center, which could accommodate a similar number of refugees. So these were the capacities of Lithuania. But if you remember, the figures I mentioned of the migrants who crossed the border were much higher. Due to the measures that Lithuania has undertaken, the figures of illegal migrants has reduced. When it comes to the legal basis, we believe that the legal basis for the migrants to come to Lithuania is to cross the border through the designated places. A majority of the people did not have any passports, any documents. So we do face with very daily situations when people come to the Lithuanian national border, and when they fail to get into Lithuania, our society consequently raise the questions whether the policy that has been undertaken by Lithuania is the right one, whether the measures comply with the human rights standard. Well, I do believe that we should look for the balance. We have to strike the balance. We are discussing with various officials, and currently, more often than no, we are looking for the balance. And we have to have in mind that much has been said, but we believe that this migration crisis is the result of the hybrid attack. People who come to Lithuania don't have passports. Also, there are many signs that the process of migration has been instigated by the Belarusian authorities, as the Belarusian authorities would issue various documents for the migrants, would pay for the health insurance. So this goes to say that people access the Belarusian territory legally. They are accommodated in hotels, but as the numbers of flights have doubled or tripled from Iraq and other countries, there were quite a lot of vulnerable people who came to Belarus and consequently tried to get into Lithuania. That's why there are so many debates as to what should be done with those vulnerable people. But in this discussion and in this narrative, we have to speak about our national interests. And one of the national interests is securing human rights. There is yet another national interest, and that is our national security. Well, protection of borders have increased debate in our society, but I think that the situation would have been even worse if we allowed all those people go across the territory of Lithuania, because people could come to Lithuania legally, could ask for asylum, could request for asylum. Whenever we ask those people what their purpose of what is their destination, they usually say that their destination is not Lithuania. In this debate and in this situation, we have to protect both the interests of our state, to protect the state, and primarily we have to protect our borders. Lithuania has introduced the emergency situation. The decisions were taken at the Lithuanian parliament. So in certain territories, there is certain legal regime, which means that we have the right to apply certain measures. Thank you. Good evening. First and foremost, let me congratulate you on the International Human Rights Day. Thank you for the invitation to be here. From today's perspective, I'd like to take note of several things that we all agree on. The number of all migrants in July, which is over 3,000, was a challenge to Lithuania. There is also a second thing that should be taken note of. And that is the government authorities and NGOs were not ready for the flow of migrants. We have already acknowledged that. For me personally, when talking about this discussion, I think that long-term decisions are very important, which means that we have to take decisions with regard to the changes in our asylum system. When we talk about the accommodation conditions, which are much better than they were previously, but people who, let's say, were accepted to Lithuania still don't have enough space when they live, because they live in crowded rooms. So this is not human rights. Therefore, we have to speak about this problem from the perspective of human rights. Thank you. Thank you. I will continue on the thought that was started by Agle. First, I'd like to stress However we call this flow of migrants, I'd like to draw your attention that it's not some unique process that Lithuania dealt for the first time and that there was nothing similar previously. Because from the communication, we see that we were invaded by some space forces, cosmic forces. Well, in fact, from 2015, if we looked at the influx of migrants from Syria, we would notice that President Erdogan did the same as was done by President Lukashenko. So President Erdogan used migrants to pressurize the European Union. President Mr. Lukashenko also undertakes the same measures and uses migrants as an instrument. Well, Russia also used migration in the very same way. It should also be noted that migrants have used the channels opened for them by sea, by lorries, by freezer lorries. We remember the stories when migrants died in freezers. We can't say that the migrants that come to Lithuania are different from the migrants that used to come to other countries. I guess it's a misunderstanding. If we get rid of this initial misunderstanding, then the second logical notice would be that those people who come to Lithuania should be no different from other asylum seekers in the European Union, and no one should limit their human rights and guarantees. When we say this, it should also be noted, at least me, I wanted to raise three major problems. And the third problem is that the return policy undertaken by Lithuania is the violation of international and EU law. We make people go back to Belarus without having assessed what will happen to them in Belarus. Instead, we could offer them some space where they could submit their applications for asylum. Well, but as the Vice Minister has said, the migrants do not come to the designated border posts. So, having said that, it goes to show that we have not given the migrants any alternatives, and we have violated the international law. The 4,000 people who came to Lithuania in July were all detained without any court order. Majority of them are still detained without any court order. So thousands of people were detained. Previously, thousands of children were detained in Lithuania without any court order. No one in court looked at those decisions. No one has given migrants a lawyer to defend their rights. No one has ever challenged the decision to detain the person. No one has ever challenged whether that was the necessary and vital measure. So majority of them are still detained. Majority of them still don't have the right to check whether this has been done in the right way. I think that this is a clear violation of international and European law. Also, the statistics provided by the Ministry of the Interior is not enough. The last figure says that over 3,000 applications have been processed, and only, let's say, 30 of them were granted asylum. So I would say that 0.03% from all the applications for asylum. If you checked in the European Union how many people receive asylum from such countries as Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, and Belarus, so I think this percentage should be at least 20%. But it seems that we have introduced a super fast procedure for processing the asylum applications. So we fail to identify the people who face the risk in their own country. So I do not intend to be a very angry panelist. So it took me long until I thought what positive I could say. So I believe that the most positive moment was the intervention by the Ministry of Social Affairs and Labor when people were taken away from all those tents and from old schools, and those vulnerable people were provided with decent conditions, because previously people lived in awful tents. As the ombudsperson of the Seimas of the Republic of Lithuania said that people lived in awful and terrible conditions. Therefore, I pay respect to the Ministry of Social Affairs and Labor for dealing with this problem. So this is the positive side. This will be it. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction.
You mentioned the places of accommodation, but our guest had not opportunity to present. I give the floor to Yusuf to present the situation.
Thank you very much. As an organization which tries to promote rights of refugees and asylum seekers, I would like to say that I visited 3 temporary camps. I will call it refugee camps, and where people were kept in Kazitishkis, in Luplinai, and in Verebeyai. And I saw terrible situations there, and it was really they lived in very bad conditions during the first 2-3 months. In Kazitishkis, for example, 6 families of refugees from Iraq, 21 people lived in the old classroom, which was 42 square meters. And there were 6 different families. In the next classroom, with the same conditions, wet floors and no conditions, there lived 23 people representing 3 big families. And conditions really were not good. There were not, it was not warm water. They were washing their clothes outside with the cold water. In Luplinai, where there was a burst out of COVID among refugees, they lived in tents, and it was very wet. It was a big mat there, cold and windy area on the bank of Nemanus. And 50% of refugees in Luplinai, they did not have beds to sleep. They had the sleeping bags, and they were sleeping on the floor. And of course, this resulted in their health situation. And also, the other thing is their telephones were taken in Luplinai, and even they were forced to give their passwords to the telephones. People could not contact anybody during the 2 months. They did not receive warm food during 1 full month. The first month they were taken to Luplinai. They did not have warm food. And also boiled water. They had water from bottles, and they had just some canned food and some candies. And the situation was very bad when we visited them. It was 1st of January, and there were, I mean, 2 iron fence in this camp. Inside of the second, there were kept people who did not have yet negative COVID test result. And situation, of course, was not good also in Verebeye, where I had been. There were majority of young people, I mean single women and men, and they had a protest on 22nd of July. On the 23rd of July, some armed masked people came and beat all men and took away 16 of them. And then they, in 1 month, they found out that really these people are divided into 2 other refugee camps, including Pabrade. And one refugee from Pabrade contacted me and informed that really they were tortured, they were beaten, and they need help. But since we did not have permission, we could not visit them. Of course, these cases should be investigated. And first of all, since it's Human Rights Day, we have not to forget that all people who ask for asylum, they are human beings. It does not, I mean, it doesn't matter they are from Belarus, or they are from Iraq, or they are from Afghanistan. All of them are human beings. And we have to pay attention, first of all, to that. Even during wars, people should not forget about human rights. Okay, contradictions between Lithuania and Belarus, or between EU and Belarus, it's really serious. But it does not mean that refugees or people who are seeking for asylum, they should be kicked out like a ball between these 2 countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Yusuf. When we speak about the primary situation in the first accommodation places, we should return from the very start. Today we have the municipality of Lazdiye district. We see the Telebridge. Ausma Mishkiniene, the mayor of this district. What you faced during the crisis in your municipality, you had the first detention center. What communication with people who came to Lithuania show? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, on this important day when we speak on the topic which concerns all of us. And you've noticed correctly, Lazdiye district municipality was the first to accept the first 100 of illegal migrants. We accommodated them. We were courageous to do that. And we can share experience today. And this experience is based on our practice and on practical decisions. And we can evaluate the good and bad examples and what could have been done in a better way. As we discussed human rights, Mr. Vitalis was quite right. We have 2 challenges. We have to protect and ensure border protection, and we have the topic of human rights. Humans is a thing that we have to focus because humans are on both sides of the border. In July, we saw fear in the eyes of the people of our country, where decisions taken were not communicated in a positive way. We saw concerns that were well grounded. We saw people full of fear. I mean, people who crossed the border and who were accommodated in our district. We had a full chaos in the beginning, and later on we had a full communication. And later on, 3 months later, when they left our territory, we can say when we speak and communicate, when we look for solutions, we are able to find them. It is very important to listen and hear each other. When crisis hits, we have to learn the biggest lessons. We don't have to be at extremes. We have to look for solutions for compromise. Only after finding compromise we will be able to solve major problems. So communication with people is very important. We should not say that everything is perfect if it is not. And every step we take forward should be taken after homework is done according to the area of responsibility. Thank you. I thank the mayor. You mentioned it can be said that people sometimes were seen as weapons of a hybrid war. This is a provoking.
Yra šioje situacijoje grėsmė, ar tai yra nereguliarūs migrantai, ar tai yra Baltarusijos režimas, ar tai yra vienas ir tas pats. Galbūt tiesiog turite komentarų tai, nes kaip kritikai teikia, kartais to skirtumo nebuvo galima atrasti. Atviras klausimas, gal norėtumėt kas pradėti?
In any case, when we talk about national security, I already gave the answer. Both aspects should go hand in hand. In any case, the concept of national security is a complex one, which includes various fields of life. We talk not only about the defense of our country, but also about the security of our country, about domestic security. We talk about various tensions that there were quite a few tensions. I went to many communities. I talked to people from those communities when it came to adopting decisions and on accommodating people in one or another municipality. So we tried to adopt best possible solutions by taking into account the opinion of our community. So we talked a lot. I remember the very first days, it was Sunday, and I received first calls that the national border was crossed by 180 people, and that the border official said that there were no places where to accommodate those people. So we organized a meeting of the Emergency Commission. We talked to the heads of municipalities. We took various measures to accommodate those people, because we all believe that we have to accommodate those people. And we found the decisions, and I'm therefore very grateful to all the municipalities that actively contributed to accommodating migrants who were able to find the buildings. Although from the very first site, they might seem that they still needed some refurbishment. It should be noted that mayors of cities had to talk with their population. So it's easy for me to talk now, but when we had to adopt decisions, we faced with a lot of internal tension and many questions. So we did what we had to do. We received major criticism on the situation in Rūdininkai. So when it comes to the situation in Rūdininkai, I again met with the community of this small town. We had to accommodate people there because we had to make decisions fast. Majority of people might not know what this system is about. So the Ministry of the Interior is the coordinating institution, and various statutory institutions contributed to our efforts by accommodating people, by providing food for them, and by raising awareness among our communities, and by ensuring security within the communities. Well, I'd like to bring you back to the question of tensions. The mayor who has talked has also mentioned the tension, but was the narrative that the migrants is a threat to our national security has contributed to that? Well, but we had to answer the questions to our society on a daily basis. So I'll finish up that. The tension was created not by the people who had to answer the questions, but, well, society itself was very tense and pressurized, and we therefore had to take actions and to make sure, to ensure our society that we can ensure security for the citizens. We wanted to calm society down. The Ministry of the Interior and the Ministry of Social Affairs and Labor worked hand in hand. We worked with the communities, and, well, I do admit there was the rejection reaction. We held many meetings via Teams platform, which enabled us to join to bring together many stakeholders, which means that we talked at the same time not only with mayors, but also with the community members. There were cases when we had to take voting, and society would reject one or another idea of accommodating migrants. We do respect the opinion of the community, but on the other hand, I would also like to express my appreciation of the municipalities of Vilnius, Naujininkai, Rukla, because these communities, well, they did have various fears. They had some superstitions, but these were the communities which asked precisely, how can we help the migrants? And they did this all on voluntary basis. And only then we realized that not all the communities have very negative attitudes towards migrants. I am a sociologist myself. We do things because there are reasons for that. Lithuania responded to the threat from the east because of some historical links and the things that we do remember from the old times. Therefore, protecting our borders is very important. However, protecting human rights should be of equal importance. I would also like to comment this narrative. It seems that at the very beginning, we talked too much about aggression and the non-traditional migration route. We talked about we called the people who crossed the border illegally as criminals. We used to hear that those migrants were not real asylum seekers. To my opinion, this narrative has contributed a lot to negative attitudes and fears of our communities. When I met with communities, I noticed that, let's say, previously some religious or ethnic differences were very important for our communities. However, everybody now thought that the criminal situation would deteriorate once the migrants are transferred and accommodated in their own communities. I think this happened due to the messages that society received at the very beginning of the migration crisis. Moreover, we started talking too late about the fact that we accommodated a lot of vulnerable people. We tried to calculate how many children, how many women, how many pregnant women or women with very severe disabilities we had. So we had to show the humane face of the migration. And due to the lack of this information, we created the sense of insecurity within our society, which means that there are lessons that we have to take. I'd like to give the floor to Yusuf because, well, we talked from the point of view of communities, but what asylum seekers felt when they came to Lithuania.
First of all, I would like to support the previous speaker who said that really bad rumors were spread and demonization. There was some demonization, and from the very initial stage, these refugees or asylum seekers were shown to the communities as danger. Why Lithuanians today who have empty apartments do not want to rent the apartments for the refugees who already received the status, and this status is given by Lithuanian government, but population do not want because there was a lot of demonization, and I think among the refugees or people who are seeking for asylum, there is no difference. They are from Belarus, they are from Iraq or from Afghanistan. They are human beings, and according to international standards, they are equal. But when there is a selective attitude or selective standards from Lithuanian authorities, let's say, it of course deepens the problem, because really Lithuania is sending, let's say, migrants to another country is much more than receiving them. How do we think when Lithuanians go to England or to Norway? Do they cause security for Norwegian government or nationality? Why we do not think from the other side, from the other approach to look, just to feel that we or you everybody may become a refugee or, seek asylum in the other country. The history of Lithuania shows that hundreds of Lithuanians took refuge during Second World War. And also during Soviet times, Lithuanians were taken to Siberia. Some of them, went to Tajikistan. I know one case when a person was born in Tajikistan because accidentally they sent the family to Tajikistan. And this guy is now 60 years old. And it may happen to everybody. So Lithuanians should not forget that really Lithuania also had refugees. And these refugees were accepted and saved their lives. And for example, in dangerous times, every human being tries to protect himself from being arrested or killed, and it's a natural thing. And migration is not something new to show it like a threat, like a danger. It was happening always. That is why, countries are mixed, different ethnic groups live in different countries. So it's normal, and we should look at this as a normal thing, not just as a threat, as a national threat. What should these refugees do? How do you think? Should they, just stay and die in their home countries? Or should they use the opportunities when the flights are increased, number of flights are increased, and they were waiting for that for a long time, and to use this opportunity to come to Europe? They are not coming just to Lithuania, yes, but Lithuania is a border of EU. We should not forget it. And these people are seeking for asylum and trying to use any means just to save their lives.
Before I give the floor to Laurynas Biekša, I'd like to talk about the context itself.
Yusuf mentioned that migration is a normal part in history. We also feel a threat from the east. Lithuanians also were refugees in the past. This is a not normal situation when over 80% of people in Lithuania, according to new opinion polls, see refugees as criminals, and many say that don't want to live with the refugees in their vicinity. I give the floor to Laurynas Biekša. I would like to have a real discussion to react to what Vice Minister of the Interior said. I agree. I really think that when numbers increased drastically, when so many people arrived and the government decided to locate those people to different towns and localities, to some defunct premises, in reality, many problems with local communities emerged, and larger or smaller problems existed in terms of local communities. And the Vice Minister really sincerely stressed that, because this was a great challenge in the beginning of the process. Having said that, I want to emphasize that this was the problem, that the state reacted, but the state called this problem that migrants come and want to destroy the foundations of our country. The migrants were not the problem. It was us. We were not able to receive 4,000 immigrants and to accommodate them in local communities without making 30 hotspots in Lithuania. The government didn't want to have some 30 more hotspots. But where the problem lies are these migrants who are destroying the foundations of the state, or the state was not able to manage in receiving migrants and confronting local communities, and then we finally economically reacted by detaining them, closing the border to keep people calm. When we did that, as Mr. Yusuf Muhammad Zoda said, we took another incorrect step. We said that we are defending Lithuania from some kind of evil. We had the demonization of new arrivals, seeing them as threats. And you are then have more flexibility in your hands to violate human rights, because the society is afraid, and the society allows the state to violate human rights. And we got ourselves in a vicious circle. First, the state was not capable in administering the situation, and then adopted the laws that violate human rights, and later on fueled the fire by explaining their decisions of violations of human rights, by calling those people the form of evil. If you look at this with normal eyes, 4,000 people was not a threat to the foundations of the Lithuanian state. Before giving the floor to the Vice Minister, I wanted to mention and ask you, do you think the society supports the decisions of the government? Because the largest part of the society supports the construction of the border, of the physical fence at the border of Belarus. Well, do not put it into simple terms. This situation was more complex than you say. we were not trying to present a situation in different light. The situation was complicated, actually. We had all indications of our services that collect intelligence information, and having in mind the threats that we had to evaluate. And the evaluation actually influenced certain decisions. Security of the border was actually considered a priority. We spoke to our local communities, so we tried to speak with the representatives of communities by saying that we will manage the situation and that we were not alone in this area, that police forces, that state border security services, we had mobile groups performing different functions. And thanks to these efforts and different measures, the construction of a physical barrier, cooperation with municipalities, we are in a situation that we have now. Actually, pushback was something that the dictator did not expect. He created the problem artificially. And he did not expect this reaction from Lithuania, the reaction of a pushback. And I don't think that the population in Belarus are happy with the views they saw. And by understanding and realizing that this is a problem, decisions were taken. People are actually flown back to their state of origin from Minsk. And actually, I don't want to put the situation in simple terms. We had comprehensive decisions. We cooperated with NGOs. And each time when we addressed NGOs and we heard their remarks, we heard their recommendations, we had to create proper conditions. We did not have them at hand. It was not an easy task for us. Now, in the public discourse, we see the topic of pushback. And actually, we're not addressing the fact of the situation in the detention centers like Kybartai. In Kybartai, people seem to be contained in or detained in prison-like conditions. What is the psychological, mental situation of these people? Are the fundamental rights of these people ensured in Kybartai? Maybe somebody would like to react. Yusuf?
From the very beginning, these asylum seekers were received negatively. And the attitude was negatively. It was publicized that they are illegal migrants. And also, nobody, published an article or had a program from inside of these refugee camps. If we think that it's a crisis has two sides. Of course, one side is speaking a lot, demonizing another side, but nobody listens to the second side, to refugees themselves. I will tell you just one example of healthcare in these detention centers, let's say previous ones. In Kazitishkis, the first doctors visited these people, 120 people who were placed in 8 small classrooms. The first doctor visited them on 2nd of September, after 2 months when they were there. Of course, some ambulances were called when there was a difficulty, health problem, but these ambulances could not prescribe medicines. They just gave them some painkillers and that's all. And the first doctor came there just in 2 months, and I'm thanking Janeta Meiduniene, who is working for Ignalina Public Health Bureau, who did a lot to bring this doctor to the refugee camp. And also, I was involved directly in calling ambulance for an Iraqi, 20 years old Iraqi, who had pains in genitals and who had problem. And just in 12 hours, we could agree with the ambulance to visit them. What was the reason? When I called, a refugee called, said, I'm asking the guards to call ambulance, but they are not doing it. Ambulance is not coming. I called ambulance directly, and I asked, there is a person who has problems for 3 days, and you should visit. And they said, if it is a refugee camp, they connected me to their boss, who was a lady, who answered that if it is a refugee camp, we will not go until the guards do not call us, because we are instructed to visit them just if guards are calling. And attitudes of guards were not positive, was not positive. In all 3 refugee camps I visited, because they did not like them. They said, these refugees, were waiting for some 5-star hotels, and we don't have it for them. We have a lot of needy people in Lithuania. I understand, it was this type of stereotyping. We started from the very beginning of this migration crisis. But I would like also to end with a positive note that when I talked to this Janeta Medunyene, she said, working for 2 months closely with refugees, she saw who are them, and she understood their position and said, I cannot imagine myself being in Iraq with my 2 kids, not knowing the language, not knowing the culture, and being treated like this. It will be really very awful. It will be a catastrophe for me to appear in such a situation. So talking about migrants or asylum seekers, they are asylum seekers because not asking them, not learning their cases, authorities, they declare them illegal migrants. Refugees have a right to cross the border illegally. It happened with everybody. When they ask asylum, it's normal, it's not a crime. But they are still treated like criminals. Even in the best refugee camps, we are visiting now in Inca from time to time, still people are, guarded. They are brought to our lessons by these special people. People are sitting inside when we have lessons. They do not allow them to talk to us, to NGO representatives. And I asked the director, I said, are you treating them like in the prison? She said, no. But I said, why you do not allow them to talk to us? Why then cannot move inside the camp freely? They are guarded always. And of course, I would like just to, everybody should feel himself or herself instead of a refugee or asylum seeker. Then we will understand that it's not easy to leave your homeland. No place is better than your homeland, but when it's danger, you will leave it. And it may happen to everybody.
As Yusuf has mentioned, we have moved from the primary situation to the situation now in Kybartai and Naujininkai. Returning to the question by the reader, what is the situation in Kybartai now? We are monitoring the situation and the conditions in 5 centers or camps. In general terms, the most difficult situation is in Kybartai. Answering the second part of the question, what is the mental and psychological situation of people? Well, actually, the situation is bad and poor, especially in Kybartai, because Kybartai is a former prison with all the attributes of a prison. And people who moved to the Border Protection Service still apply practices of a prison. And the mental situation of these people is also influenced by the fact that the cases are being analyzed and they get negative answers. They're not granted asylum, and they are prevented from the right of information. They do not know how long they will be detained, how long this asylum process, asylum application is going to be processed. And speaking about Kibarte and comparing this camp with other camps, we still have prison-like practices that should not exist in refugee camps. My question to Vice Minister, what are the attempts or measures to ensure psychological help, mental assistance, mental counseling to these people? Well, this psychological situation, well, Kibarte is a place of accommodation because people were transferred from tents. The consequences, the conditions should be evaluated, and people should know that these are complicated processes. We found the place, we accommodated these people. Certainly many factors exist. Well, speaking about the psychological situation, both the psychological teams that were formed also by NGOs, all the camps are being visited both in terms of psychological assistance and social assistance. Our ministry, together with the Ministry of Education, is providing psychological counseling and assistance, and organization of this assistance and translation matters actually have already been addressed. In summer, when we saw rising numbers, a basic service package was formed according to different types of people, families, and their ages in order to coordinate necessary services to be provided to the refugees. Since NGOs are visiting different accommodation places, they see the situation and could comment that long detention process, longer detention period is not favorable to the mental state, psychological situation of refugees. In Lithuania, we process not only the asylum applications, but we also grant people the humanitarian status where people can stay and work in Lithuania. Speaking about the detention conditions, from the very beginning, when we detain those people, we face a big problem. The areas in the camps where security was not ensured for those people effectively. We read stories from Rūdininkai, violence, abuse. We knew, actually, we heard cases of different violence, and the same could be said about Kibarte, because common areas are not effectively ensured to be safe. I would like to draw a parallel to the human rights of people in Lithuania. In Lithuania, in prisons, we have the same threats. People who are imprisoned in Lithuania are not afraid of being deprived of freedom. They're afraid of something bad happening to them because they will not be ensured safety from other people. The same can be said about the migrants. Well, I would like to address one issue that human rights activists and lawyers understand it very well. Those who demand the insurance of human rights are being termed as agents and Lukashenko's friends. But we have to understand that if we don't defend the human rights of those people, if we don't ensure decent conditions of those people in detention, we will never have decent conditions in our prisons for Lithuanians. If lower standards are allowed in one area, no high standards can be upheld in another area. Human rights activists are not agents against Lithuania. They are patriots of our country that we all want to live in, the country that respects human rights. We can achieve the same migration goals by seeing the difference between the perpetrators and the victims. If we do not do that, if we don't have decent conditions in Kybartai today, we will not have good conditions in Lithuania for 100 years. If we want to ensure decent conditions for people, we either want to ensure those conditions or we want to ignore them. We will have one standard, and the standard will be low in terms of human rights in detention. Minister, would you like to react? Well, certainly we attach the priority to vulnerable groups. And when speaking about Kybartai, we know the problems. We are trying to react whenever we discover. Um, we're trying to investigate the situation. Certainly, there are certain aspects. This is a former prison, but we have a dormitory type premises with large rooms where numbers of people accommodated, according to my calculations, is too dense in concrete terms. But speaking about dense and cold weather, we do not have other way out. We had to make fast decisions in order to change the situation. And I'm glad to hear that NGOs, while visiting our facilities, indicate the problems. And these problems, first of all, should be seen as a priority for our institutions that administer the facilities and the ministry. In legal terms, the procedures are very simple. We actually run the procedure. We see whether there is grounds for granting asylum, and in the end, a person who has no grounds for asylum should be returned to the country of origin. We will have longer consequences of that. We have to think about processes ahead of us, about integration, education, social services that have to be ensured for these people. And I would be very happy if we were all included into the solution of these issues, so that it is not only the prerogative of the Ministry of the Interior. All our society has to be mobilized in solving this issue. Speaking about information attacks, we have different types of information and news. One of the goals that we have is polarization. Dialogue is needed. We need to assess every situation. Decisions could be quicker, but in principle, without NGOs, without social partners, we are not able to succeed. I would like to give the floor to Yusuf, and then we will talk about pushback policy. So the floor goes to Mr. Yusuf.
People, how, I mean, a refugee or a person who is needed selects a country to go and to feel safer. Of course, they will not choose the worst countries than their own, so they select a safer place. And a lot of people who come to EU area, including Lithuania, they think that EU is the best safe place where human rights are observed. And people are treated normally and human beings, like human beings. But when we met these refugees, the first question was why we are treated like criminals. We are asking for asylum. And we did not expect that. Really, and it concerns reputation of Lithuania. Lithuania is not a very attractive country for foreigners to come and live. Even Lithuanians themselves, they leave Lithuania for this, to look for a better conditions for living. So making this type of attitude, having this type of attitude towards 4,000 refugees, it means that these people, they will inform the others what is the life in Lithuania, how people are foreigners or foreigners are treated. Because I live in Lithuania for 3 years. Two of my kids are already speaking Lithuanian. My wife works in Lithuanian school, and my kids are studying in the colleges and universities of Lithuania. And I think their life will be connected to Lithuania in future. And I care about the reputation of Lithuania, as well as a leader of a refugee-led organization. We would try very much to pay attention to this issue because really this was good. 10th of December is a good day to discuss these issues. But it should not be just 10th of December. There should be much more events which raise issues of human rights, not just for refugees, but all human beings. Because when rights of refugees are neglected, then the rights of the other people also may be neglected. Refugees are coming and are becoming part of this society, Lithuanian society, as I did. And they should be treated as human beings.
Yusuf has mentioned the issue of international reputation of Lithuania, but I would also like to touch upon the return policy undertaken by Lithuania. So my question is whether this return policy might damage the international image of Lithuania. The government of the Republic of Lithuania say that they did not hear any reprimands from Brussels, but maybe anyone would like to touch upon this issue. Vice Minister? In any way, this question is one of the most important ones in this debate. It should be noted that the return policy has not been applied. We would have had many more migrants than the mentioned 4,000, and the processes would have not been that smooth, and we would have needed the engagement of the European Union and the support from the European Union. We then would be talking about the assistance of other countries, the forces of other countries, which will not be related to the protection of national borders as it is now, because now major focus of Frontex and other states is to the protection of our borders. We should not forget that the return policy is not absolute. There were cases when we adopted decisions allowing entry to some migrants. We allowed entry to vulnerable people. We discussed a very similar case that happened last week. Well, we don't have much time for details, but I'd like to give the floor to other speakers. So I would say that the European Union and the European Commission, as well as with the Commissioner in Domestic Affairs, was well aware of what we were doing. We provided them algorithms and information as to what we were planning to undertake, and we did not receive any reprimands from the European Union. These questions are still very open, and they need to be debated. I'll be very brief. I will not repeat why this return policy is against the law. So we should not be looking for further arguments, but I would can say what can be do better, even if. So first, we should not lie. We should stop lying. If we say to people that they have to go to the border crossing points and apply for asylum, we know that it is impossible. It is impossible for them to get to the border post. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that if we tell to people, well, it's not about diplomatic representations, so I don't have time to explain that. But if we say to people that we apply humanitarian exception to vulnerable people, then look, I don't know how our state imagines the humanitarian exception, but if we have a family with 4 children where the smallest one is 2 years, and the family is still pushed away to spend the night in the forest, I don't think this is the humanitarian exception. So if we violate the law, we should not keep lying. And once again, we should allow journalists to observe those return policies that are undertaken by Lithuania. Let our society know of what is happening in the Lithuanian border. Let's provide some transparency to the process, because as long as we close ourselves within the communication, if we do not allow access to journalists, and if we say that we receive hybrid bullets, then it's not the solution. We have to become fair and stop lying. Well, unfortunately, we don't have much time. I hope that we will have some occasions in the future. I'd like to thank all the panelists as well as the participants of the debate, and I wish a good day to you. Thank you.